It was a cold December evening in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, in 1979. Michelle Martinko, an 18-year-old high school senior, had just finished a long day of shopping at the Westdale Mall. It was just a few days before Christmas, and the mall was busy with holiday shoppers, but Michelle was alone. She had been at the mall with her mother earlier, but they had separated to go their different ways. Michelle had wanted to buy a gift for her parents and get some things for herself, typical teenage holiday preparations. After spending several hours there, Michelle headed back to her car, a 1972 Buick, parked on the south side of the parking lot. She drove away from the mall, heading toward her home. But she never made it. Instead, sometime after she left the parking lot, Michelle's car was found parked in a dark corner of the lot, near the Gordon's jewelry store. The car's headlights were still on when police discovered it hours later, and Michelle's lifeless body was found inside. She had been brutally attacked, stabbed multiple times in the face, neck, and chest. Michelle Martinko was dead. There was no sign of a robbery, no sign of sexual assault. Her purse, car keys, and other personal items were all intact. The crime didn't seem like an ordinary carjacking or a random attack. Instead, it appeared to be personal, a targeted, violent assault. The scene was gruesome, and the brutality of it would stay with investigators for years. The investigation, a mysterious murder in the hours following the discovery of Michelle's body, investigators were immediately faced with the complexity of the crime. The autopsy revealed Michelle had been stabbed at least 7 times, with 2 of the wounds being deep enough to damage vital organs. She had also been strangled. It was clear that she had fought for her life. Her hands were bruised from defensive wounds, and she had tried to protect her face from the violent blows. Despite the violent nature of the murder, there were few immediate clues for detectives to follow. There was no weapon left at the scene, no fingerprints, and no other obvious evidence. The investigators interviewed Michelle's family and friends but found no one who had a clear motive for wanting to harm her. She was a well-liked, high-achieving young woman, and there were no reports of threats or conflicts in her life. She had no known enemies. As detectives combed through the crime scene and spoke to witnesses who had been in the area that night, they struggled to find a solid lead. While some people said they'd seen a man in the parking lot shortly before Michelle's body was discovered, no one could identify him, and there was no other physical evidence to help them build a case. With each passing day, the trail grew colder. Frustration and dead ends. The years passed as the weeks turned into months and then years. Michelle's case went cold. The local police department worked tirelessly, but with no suspects, no solid leads, and no new forensic evidence, the case stagnated. The DNA evidence collected at the scene, from Michelle's body, clothing, and car, was preserved, but at the time, DNA analysis technology was not advanced enough to provide any breakthrough. Without matching the DNA to a suspect or a database, it seemed like the case would remain unsolved. The case was regularly revisited by detectives, and new theories about possible suspects arose over the years. There were multiple attempts to re-examine the evidence using the latest forensic technologies. Some detectives even believed the crime was committed by a serial killer, based on the level of violence and the apparent randomness of the attack. But nothing definitive emerged, and the frustration grew. The Martinko family, too, struggled with the absence of justice. For Michelle's parents, Dan and Judy Martinko, every year without an arrest was another painful reminder that their daughter's killer had never been found. While life continued, the haunting image of Michelle's last moments stayed with them. They attended every anniversary of Michelle's death and hoped for a break in the case. But year after year, no one could offer any new answers. The breakthrough, genetic genealogy, fast forward to 2018, and the case was still cold. But at this point, a groundbreaking technology was beginning to revolutionize the way cold cases were being solved: genetic genealogy. This method, which combined DNA analysis with genealogical databases, had recently been used to solve several high-profile cold cases, including the notorious Golden State Killer case. Cedar Rapids police decided to try something they hadn't considered before, uploading the DNA evidence from Michelle's case to publicly available genealogy databases, including GEDmatch. While many of these databases were originally created for people searching for their biological relatives, investigators had realized that they could use the information to trace genetic connections to distant relatives of the perpetrator. In late 2018, a breakthrough came. Through genetic genealogy, investigators identified a distant relative of the suspect who had submitted their DNA to GEDmatch. From this relative, investigators were able to narrow down the family tree and pinpoint a suspect, Jerry Lynn Burns, a 64-year-old man from the Cedar Rapids area. Burns had no criminal record, and he had never been considered a suspect in the case. In fact, he had lived just a few miles away from the scene of the crime and had passed the time during the investigation without raising any suspicion. But thanks to the groundbreaking work of genetic genealogists, authorities now had a name. The arrest and trial of Jerry Lynn Burns in December 2018, investigators took the next critical step. They obtained a sample of Jerry Burns' DNA. They did so by secretly collecting it from a coffee cup Burns had thrown away after visiting a local restaurant. The DNA obtained from the coffee cup matched the DNA from the crime scene. On December 19, 2018, nearly 40 years to the day after Michelle Martinko's murder, Jerry Lynn Burns was arrested. Burns was charged with first-degree murder in the killing of Michelle Martinko. The arrest was a stunning revelation for both the Martinko family and the public. Burns had lived just a few miles away from the crime scene, and his name had never once appeared on investigators' radar. At first, Jerry Burns denied any involvement in the crime. He claimed that the DNA match was a mistake, and his defense team suggested that the evidence could have been contaminated or mishandled. But the evidence was overwhelming. Burns' DNA had matched the crime scene, and forensic experts pointed out that it was impossible for the DNA to have been planted. As the trial approached, investigators began to gather more evidence about Burns' life and his movements in 1979. Burns was a family man and had been married at the time of the murder. But nothing about his personal life appeared to indicate a motive for murder. Still, the DNA evidence was irrefutable. Burns was charged with Michelle's murder and stood trial in 2020. The legacy: justice for Michelle. After more than 3 decades of waiting for justice, Michelle Martinko's family finally saw their daughter's killer brought to trial. In March 2020, Jerry Lynn Burns was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The Martinko family, while forever grieving their daughter's loss, could at least rest knowing that the man responsible for her death would never harm another person. The case had finally been solved, and it marked a turning point in the use of genetic genealogy as a tool for solving cold cases. The success of the Michelle Martinko case served as a catalyst for other law enforcement agencies across the country to adopt similar techniques, leading to the resolution of other long unsolved cases. Conclusion: the case of Michelle Martinko serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of persistence in the pursuit of justice. Despite nearly 40 years of uncertainty and frustration, the Martinko family and investigators never gave up hope. Advances in forensic science, particularly genetic genealogy, made the impossible possible. The story of Michelle's murder and the eventual conviction of Jerry Lynn Burns is a story of perseverance, technology, and the power of never giving up on seeking justice for victims of violent crimes.